Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive, and we are taking the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. I have the Back to the Future scratch offs. We will have these next Wednesday. We're going to be at Greenmount Station in Hampstead. Come on out, say hello in beautiful Carroll County. We're going to get back out to Fadley's on the 13th of June. I'm also working up some special first time stops out in Baltimore County, as well as in Baltimore City for the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, all presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Liberty Pure, as well as Curio Wellness and our friends at Coppin State, where they just graduated a bunch of folks on Friday. It was a long holiday weekend. Luke and I burned up the edges last week when I got back from Las Vegas on all things Orioles and the hideous losing streak and falling 18 games under 500. The Ravens are going to get back out onto the field the next couple of weeks. They have OTAs and then a mandatory mini camp into the middle of June. The calendar sort of slid a little bit on that. And you will hear on AM 1570, if you're out of Baltimore Positive, you will hear and see some thoughts about the loss of Jim Irsay last week in Indianapolis and the Irsay name in Baltimore and my relationship with Jim and Jim's relationship with the Colts and all of that. But along all of this, we lost a colleague of mine and someone that I think Luke has gotten to know over the last 20 years, someone that I was a colleague and a coworker with in the late 1980s. He was already a made guy, a baseball beat writer, and a sort of a legendary baseball character at that point. Went on to be an official scorer, went on to write and continue to write at Press Box, amongst other places, for many, many, many years. And the Press Box, which I'm still banned from at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, bears his name. Jim Henneman and I work together. And I want to bring Luke in right now because I think Rick Vaughn's going to join me later in the week. And I went sort of through my mind of searching for the kind of people that I would reach to talk about Jim Henneman and a lot of editors and people I worked with. I saw Rasig had jumped on. But, I was a kid that loved being at the ballpark, and I had a press pass in the late 80s. And Henneman was the beat writer. And listen, when Henneman was replaced on the beat by Ken Rosenthal, it was it was a big thing to be replaced by a 24-year-old guy in Ken Rosenthal. So I lived through all of that as a 17, 18, 19-year-old guy. And I've known Jim, it feels like all my life, and a real fixture at Orioles games in all the time I've ever gone or been out there to see him. If he felt eternal to me, and I don't know that I should be shocked by a man of his age passing in the way that it happened. But I was kind of taken aback, and I know a lot of people were. And we're going to gather and honor his life a little later on this week. But I wanted to give you some oxygen because I've never had a press pass when you've had, well, it's the lie. You and I had a press pass for a couple of games in Kansas City in the playoffs. You and I had a press pass in Arlington a year and a half ago, but I have never been in the Oriole Park at Camden Yards press box while you've been there, even though you've been my employee for going on 16 years, 17 years.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, let me be clear. I mean, I certainly knew Henny and had great respect for him. I'm not going to pretend to act as though I was as close with him as many of the Orioles reporters, who have, either on the beat for a long time, had since moved on, the Tim Kirkshins of the world and Ken Rosenthal, as you mentioned. But anyone who's covered the Orioles for any period of time, even just a couple years, I mean, you certainly knew Henny, and I knew him much more as, he was the biggest fixture as far as the official scores. Usually there's a rotation of three, four, five official scores that will do games over the course of a full 81 game home schedule at Camden Yards. But when I first, what was on the beat, 2010 was my first year covering the Orioles. Henny was the guy for, I don't know, those 81 home games, 50 maybe, 55, right? I mean, if not more. So I knew him through that. And I think for any of us who are privileged enough to find ourselves in this space of sports media, whether we're talking about what you and I do over the radio or here online or, print, broadcasting, TV, whatever it is. For those of not talking former players, talking those that this is as close as we get to it without having played the game at that high of a level. I think there's always a striving for having an opinion, having, whether it's, you're a beat reporter, breaking news, whether it's opinions, whether it's calling the games, whatever your space is, whatever your niche is. I think there's a longing to be a voice that inspires some trust. It's not to say that everyone's going to agree with everything you say, not everyone's going to love every opinion you have, but I think there's a thought that you strive to become a fixture in some way. And Henny's on that list, as Baltimore writers go, as Baltimore media goes. I mean, what a legacy. You're talking about someone who you go back to the International League Orioles, right? You go back to the earliest days, before the Orioles' glory years. The idea that he was a PR director for the Baltimore Bullets for 5 years. I mean, that's pretty special. And I think when you talk about someone who's done it that long, they become an authoritative voice. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily the only voice or the only opinion or the only take that matters, but it's someone who you go to. It's someone who you read on a regular basis. Just in the same way that, if you're a radio person, someone wants to they catch your show. They love segments on your show, whatever. Yeah, I think, in this business, you're always striving to be something like that. And to do it as long as Henny did it, I mean, that's special. That's impressive, and that's where I just had a great deal of respect for him. I was honored to be on the list of invitees to when the Orioles announced they were going to name the press box after him. I think it was the week of the AFC Championship game 2 winters ago. And it was cool.
I didn't get that press
I
release.
understood. I understand, but I'm just saying, like, just being invited to see how emotional he was over that. I mean,
I'm
that's
sorry I
cool.
missed stuff like that.
No,
That's the
I
kind of
know, and
stuff
I
that,
and I and I agree with
yeah.
you. But just to have that kind of a legacy for any of us in any walk of life, when you do a job that long in some capacity and you last that long, one of the cool things about the fact that the Orioles did that for him, they did it while he was still here with us. This wasn't something done posthumously. We're very good as a society of giving flowers when someone's passed away, when someone isn't with us anymore. We need to be, as a society, not just sports or sports media, just in general. The people in our lives, our family, our closest friends, we all need to be more deliberate and better about giving people their flowers when they're still here, to show them what. So like just to be the tiniest little piece of that. Again, I might have he might have known me the least out of everyone that was in the room that day, but it was just, it was an honor to see that and to kind of think that someone can do something for that long. I think that's special. And from that standpoint, I know he did the coffee table book when the Orioles it was their 60th anniversary back in, I got that. My mom gave that to me as a Christmas present that year. And, just to even be able to do something like that and the way you've chronicled both Ravens Super Bowl teams, right? I mean, it's special getting to do something like that, regardless of, even, how profitable it is or any of that, just to be able to chronicle something for that long, in the way that he did that, I think is pretty special.
So Henny passed, and I saw it on my Facebook, and I began to work at the Evening Sun in January of 1986. So I was 17. My parents had to sign a permission slip to work there. And my dad was a News American reader, not necessarily an Evening Sun reader, although we got the Evening Sun on Saturdays
Mhm.
because my dad bought the Saturday and Sunday Sun. So we get the Saturday. So I would read Jackman. I would read the paper that I then would go to work for, the Evening Sun. But we were News American readers, not Evening Sun readers in my house. So the writers, in my house, it was more Stedman, it was more Bernie Miklasz,
Mhm.
it was more, it was just a different set of writers. But Henneman was like one of those guys that was he always had the baseball notes columns, and much like Peter Gammons was very plugged in everywhere through the sport. And when Ken Rosenthal was a very, very young man in 1987, taking over that beat, 87, 80, it was 86 or 87. It was very, very early on. And Henneman then went to like write a baseball column, and it made our baseball coverage that much better at a time when Earl Weaver had come back to manage, right? It was
Hmm.
86, 87, 88.
Right.
We're going into the dark hole of 88, and then 89's the why not year during that period of time. So when Henny passed, I have a box of newspaper clips that my wife sort of laughs at, but she just has such reverence, and I think I'm keeping it for my kid. My kid's 41; he doesn't care about any of this stuff. I
Hmm.
guess there's no one in the world that cares about it other than me, which makes it special, right? What makes it unto you, right? And maybe the people that were involved in making the newspaper sections. Whenever I'm with Mike Marlowe or Bob Nussgard, Larry Harris, who's been battling some dementia of late, we all get together at the Guinness Brewery, Stan Rappaport, Molly Dunham, all these names from Evening Sun past. Jack Gibbons, of course, the Godfather, and my boss, Chris Zhang, longtime editor as well. These were all my big brothers and
Hmm.
parents really when I was a 19-year-old kid. So I have this box and it means everything to me, that box. Like there's some stuff around like you can have this, you can have that. Don't, the old tapes that I have of the shows, the old clips, they're all in a couple of boxes. They don't mean anything to anybody. But on a day when Jim Henneman dies, I reach for that box and I knew I was connected to him in a way, and nobody would know it. Like in the last 20, I don't think I've talked to Jim in 20 years. I haven't been in the press box.
Right.
I mean, well, like once I got thrown out in 2006, I, maybe I ran into Jim at a Babe Ruth event, but they've excommunicated me too. Like they had a party in Hart. Nobody calls me. I'm not a black sheep. I'm a brown sheep. That's a inside joke for the Whistler because I'm Hispanic. I'm not black, but I've been brown sheeped, and so I don't really see the media people. I'm a literal pariah. I'm a leper. You know this. You've seen it. You've seen how you get treated differently when I'm in the room. I see it when I go to Jamie Costello's goodbye party. I mean, just people that are associated with the baseball team are not allowed to speak to me. They have to, or they used to not be allowed to. I don't know about anything, but it was that way for 30 years. It was tyrannical. So I never saw Jimmy, saw his work in press box. I wouldn't say that we had a bad relationship or a great relationship. It was professional. Like I had a press pass for many, 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 many years. Like 15 years after we weren't colleagues, I saw him out there 50, 60, 80 times. Hey, Nestor, I mean, I could do his voice.
Hmm.
Like that's how well I knew Henny. But I didn't sit and like do a lot of deep baseball discussion with him really much of ever because he was watching the games. He was the official scorer. I was a different age group, just in like, but
Sure.
there was never anything. But we were like real colleagues that, like a young whippersnapper like you, when I get the box out of the stuff that I was involved in, and I just shared these, and I want to story tell a little bit, because I really didn't story tell when it came to these pictures, but um, I want to share. I hope we're seeing the right one, the Mike Bilecki one. And this one was like the craziest thing ever because Rosenthal wrote the lead story. It was my mother's birthday, August 3rd of 1989. So you think 89 right there. This is why not summer.
Hmm.
The Orioles are good. They've won another game here, down 6-0 in a
The
game. Like,
Fenway 6-0 comeback game. Yeah.
okay, so
That was one of their big because they were reeling on that road trip and it kind of they righted the ship a little bit. Yeah.
says my Oriole historian, Lucas Jones, who was, how old were you? Five, right? You're
I
five.
it was I read up on that team a little more
No, but you were
retroactively,
five, though, right?
but it was more I it was probably 2 or 3 years after that I started like
All right.
it's like I
So
pieced it together,
Luke
right?
was
My
five
memories
in
of it.
1989,
Yeah.
and I was 20. Okay, I turned 21 in October. Okay, so Jack Gibbons sent me up to Philadelphia to chase Mike Bilecki
Hmm.
around, who was having this monster year. He and I share. We're both in the Dundalk High Hall of Fame, so I got to throw that in. But I went up to do this piece on Mike Bilecki, and I went over to his parents' house, and I sat in their living room over on Seals Road. They live about 2 blocks away from Kevin Eck, my best friend, right behind where Mine Bridge had all the baseball cards. And this clip to me was the primary clip when I tried to get a job. That I was on the front page of the Sun. I did this full take at it. It was a really long piece about Bilecki's background and pitching in Hawaii and how he wound up in this pennant race and the Cubs and like all that. He wound up pitching in the playoffs 8 weeks later. This is August of '89. And I knew all along that Jim Henneman sig,
Yeah.
that Jim Henneman was on that. And I was searching for this. I'm like, I remember Henneman was on the front page of this.
It's
So,
cool.
so you start to think about like these games and these nights, and obviously these clips had something to do with me because my story was there, so I ripped the tear sheet or I have the whole section. This is another really, really special one, and it begat another special one that I found. But this here was the day after the changing of the Murrays. So I got to attend the press conference where a brother replaced. Imagine Brandon Hyde's younger brother taking his job. That's what happened with the Caps, right?
Jim Harbaugh taking John Harbaugh's job. Yeah,
What
something
that
like
almost
that.
happened, I'm sure, a
Yeah.
couple times. January 17th of 1990. So this is about 6 months later. I'm covering hockey, right? So Jay Tibbs and Joe Orsulak are the headlines. Hall of Famer Joe Orsulak, I
Yeah.
may say. I may throw that in there as well. Milton Kent's got a headline. The great Phil Jackman is involved in this, and Mike Faraball, my one time. By the way, Faraball had the place in Ocean City that I rented during senior week. It didn't help our relationship. I just want to say that. I loved Mike Faraball though. But Jim Henneman with the lead story there. And there I am, brother, what a day for the Caps Murray. And it was the first day of Terry Murray's job as the head coach of the Caps. And I covered it, and Phil Jackman and I drove together because I was save on expenses, Jack. We'll appreciate that. One car. We'll take one car down. So Phil drove me down that night. He said, "You do the game story. I'm gonna do a sidebar. I'm gonna do a column. I'm gonna do a column on Murray." So he did a column on Murray that night. So there's winter of 1990. So I feel like I'm taking you to school, young man. I got another one here for you. Let's see if I can pull this one up because when it's Henneman, it's all baseball stuff, right?
Right.
So here you go. Now this here, Luke, this is all self-bragging on myself here to show my incredible versatility. But in the summer of 1991, June of 91, Henneman covering the Orioles still, 20-run sweep, lacked for little, 20 runs against the Kansas City Royals. Brady Anderson, Mike Devereaux, and Joe Orsulak high-fiving. We were in the middle of Wimbledon, so we have a wire piece, very unusual wire
Hmm.
piece on the front page. And then Phil Jackman was up in Delaware covering the women's LPGA, and Little Nasty Nestor covering the triathlon, where the leader got run over by a cop and lost the race because of it.
Jeez.
Yeah, there it is
That's
right there. The
crazy.
Bud Light Triathlon, Brett Rose. So Perry Thorsvik took those pictures. So there it is, Jim Henneman with the lead story and Nestor Aparicio, Evening Sun staff, escort to agony. Triathlon leader felled by police motorcycle. You think they didn't put me on the big stories, Luke? You think Jack Gibbons didn't trust me with that front page
There you
story there?
go.
And then I got the last one for you, and I just want to put this up because this is indicative of Jim Henneman. Not game stories. He did a million of them out on the front page of the thing, but Henny had his notes column. And this is where, I think and I'd love to have Rosenthal on to talk about Henneman because that was such a combustible thing to have a 23-year-old kid thrown in on the beat at that point. Eddie
Sure.
Murray's here, the whole mess, Earl Weaver. I mean, whatever. If I ever sat with Rosenthal, just sitting with him for an hour, talking to him about that point in his life and where his life has gone, sitting in dugouts and bow ties and 30 World Series and all that stuff. But these were my guys, and I always brag to you. I do brag that I work with these guys. These are the tear sheets that I have that sort of make it good, make it like legit. So I got a tear sheet here. This is from my mother's birthday, July 26, 1991. So that was my mom's birthday. So it was Friday, and it was on page 3. I had a little story here about the Baltimore Bays, Maryland Bays. Kevin Sloan, who went on to play for the Blast, got a quote here from Kenny Cooper, the whole deal. 1991. So I was 22 years old. I was coming to the end of my run at the Sun. I left 6 months later. But Henny had his Friday notes column for the week. We only published Monday through Friday. There was no Sunday notes because the Evening Sun, our notes columns were Friday. And I guarantee you this was sports extra. Our Friday was always sports extra. We got a couple extra pages so Henneman could get his notes in. So Henneman's notes here. You got Ben McDonald in here. You got Johnny Oates in here. You got John Sherholtz, the Baltimore native who gave up
Hmm.
a teaching career to be one of baseball's top executives. So a little notes column here and a little piece from me and an ad from Antwerpen Motor Cars with Frank Robinson and Lee Oldsmobile, Ernie Swanson's Lee Oldsmobile. So, Henneman and I'm sure we shared many a newspaper together. I found a couple. These was the couple I found off the top, and I thought they were just awesome.
That's
Just
cool. That's
writing about
absolutely cool.
soccer, writing about the triathlon, Henneman on baseball, Henneman on a lead story, Henneman in a pennant race, Jackman on a sidebar with Terry Murray. Dude, you're gonna make me cry. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. As I was kind of reflecting on Henny a little bit these last few days, and I thought about Brooks Robinson and him passing away a couple years ago, and and I don't even say this as much to pick on what the Orioles have become because we've done that plenty, and it's very easy to do that in the midst of this disaster of a season they're currently having. But there is a sense of sadness for me thinking about all those connections to the glory of the glory days for the Orioles, right? I mean, going back to the mid 60s through the early 80s and what that organization was and three World Series, pennants, division, playoffs, all, Hall of Famers, all of that. And when you're talking about a Jim Henneman or individuals of that help chronicle that era. You just when you start losing more and more pieces to that, and obviously that's secondary to his family and his friends and anyone who knew him on a personal level. But just speaking more in the Baltimore sports fan sense, you lose those ties, and it's a reminder of just how long ago that was. And I mean that really hit for me big time when Brooks Robinson passed away. I mean, for me, it wasn't so much my memories of Brooks as much as knowing what my dad's memories of Brooks were, right? And just so when you lose some of those individuals, whether you're talking about someone who chronicled it in the media like a Jim Henneman, or whether you're talking about those heroes themselves, knowing that Earl's gone and Frank's gone and Brooks is gone, and just thinking about that, that's where you do get sad that what these last 40 years have been for the Orioles in comparison to what those 20 years prior to have been. And that's where I get frustrated and look at this thing all over again and saying, you want it to be great again. You want to have more memories like what that was. And you sharing some of those press clippings. I mean, that's even though we're talking
I
about
gave you
1990.
Phil Bradley today, so I
Yeah,
thank you, Jim
and
Henneman,
I mean
for
not that
that.
1990 and 91 were the glory days because obviously that was already getting into the glory days being over for the Orioles, but just when you lose those individuals, it's a reminder of just how special that era was and also a yearning of having more of that. I've said this to you a couple times recently. I don't need to tell you this. We've talked about this for the better part of 15 years, save for a couple years here and there. That we're going on two generations of Orioles fans who all that stuff is just history. I mean, I didn't live Brooks Robinson. I didn't live 1983, like other than being 2 weeks old when Scott McGregor, completed the shutout in
You
Game
barely
5.
live Mike Devereaux for
Yeah, I
crying
mean
out
that's the thing. I
loud.
mean, like my memory of Cal Ripken was a great Hall of Fame player, but not really playing on very many good teams over most of his career, right? So, and again, I'm not saying that to pile on the modern era as much as just seeing what that once was, knowing those stories and hearing them from my grandparents and from my parents and reading the likes of Jim Henneman and others. Hearing Chuck Thompson, for me it was John Miller, even though John Miller was, kind of the tail end of the Orioles' glory days. But, just wanting to experience that again. I want Baltimore to have that again, right? However
Dude,
it
I've
is,
been
what
here 35 years, every
yeah,
minute of every
exactly. I'm
day on
not
the
telling
air
you
grinding
anything that
away
you
for
don't
this.
agree with, but when you lose someone like Henny, again, the personal side of it's far more important. The baseball side is secondary. The sports side is secondary. But thinking about that and acknowledging that, and it's just, that, all that stuff, that those glory days and the championships and all that, that's a long, long time ago at this point in time. So, and that's where it hurts even more because you could sit in the media dining and just hear Henny telling stories from 50 years ago. And, you're kind of just in awe. I mean, I'd listen, I'd listen
Well,
and
I listen to Palmer every night.
right, exactly. And there's a perfect example. I mean, that's where, Jim Palmer, man, Jim can do games as far as if it were up to me, Jim could do as many games for as long as he wants because I just love hearing him talk about that. I love hearing the stories about Earl Weaver and Brooks and Frank and him talking about Robin Roberts, right? Just all of that. I mean, it was just so special, and you don't want to lose that. So when you do lose a piece of that, when Henny passes away, I mean, it's also a reminder of all of our mortality. And to bring it full circle, to go back to the point that I made, kind of at the beginning, when you're in sports media, you know, if you can carve out a space where anyone cares to hear your opinion. I mean, I don't know if anyone cares about my opinion on things or not. I like to think that I make a decent point every now and then. A broken clock is right twice a day. But to think how many people read Jim Henneman and look forward to his notes, like you mentioned, or look forward to his reporting, or you know, reading him even in recent years in press box and just knowing how much of an authoritative voice he was on the history of the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, man, that's special. That's a heck of a legacy. And again, we should all be so lucky if we could carve out even a fraction of that in whatever our life's work is.
Luke Jones is here. We're discussing the life of Jim Henneman, and we were on to Oriole baseball and the Cardinals being in town and everything that's going on here with the team and chronicling the team and all of that. I'm just glad I got a chance to share a little bit of my old stuff that was
It's
in a
cool.
closet. That yeah, I figured you'd
It's really
like it. I
cool.
figured some people
Yeah.
would think that's kind of neat, just pulling it up. And just it was kind of neat for me to touch it again and see it again and feel it again and think, wow, there's Henneman's face right next to that big story I did, that I mean, Jim was a
There's
legend for sure.
it's funny, and this. Obviously, in this day and age, we know print journalism, like literal print journalism, is just about gone at this point. Like, I mean, we all see what newspapers look like as far as physical newspapers, not reading it online. Um, you know, I've been in this business in an era where print is just rapidly declining. And as you know, I've had the opportunity the last few years, through Howard Balzer with Lindy's Pro Football Preview. I've written the Ravens section now the last few years, and it's funny. I mean, literally the byline is my name at the in very small print, my name at the very end of the Ravens section. But it's something that I don't need it like to display it in my home, but if my nieces 15 years from now look at that and say, "Oh, Uncle Luke, you wrote in a magazine." I'm like, "Yeah, I got to do that." I mean, because so much online writing, you don't touch it physically. You don't have a hard copy of it unless you print it out by chance. So,
I feel very blessed to be of that
that's what I'm
age,
saying. I mean,
to be able
you
to
can
have this stuff that I share that is
right.
tactile, that's
I mean,
physical.
even someone who, let's say, started listening to you 5 years ago or 15 years ago, might not have any idea that you wrote for the local paper, and yet can see that clipping, and Jim Henneman's got a byline there, and Ken Rosenthal has a byline there, and people recognize those names. It's like, that's cool. Like, it's a cool thing, and I think anyone who ever has done anything creatively where you can put your name on it, it's cool to have some. You don't need to don't need to have every copy of everything you ever did, but it's neat to have some artifacts, to kind of say, hey, I did this.
When I was at the Evening Sun, I got the job in '86, and I'm 17, and I had a lot of bylines at the News American, and like everyone else, I want a byline, right? I mean, we all
Sure.
like bylines, right? And my dad liked it, it made him feel good, and so I got to the Sun, and I started writing right away. I mean, like they loved me. I mean, I have. It's amazing how many clips I worked there 6 years, and if you did the math, 6 times 365 days, it would be 2,100 days I worked there or
Yeah.
something like that. Dude, at least 1,500 bylines.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I wrote sometimes two, three times a day, high schools. I mean, as you can see, that's just a mishmash of like triathlons that I forgot I covered, right? All the
Right.
high school work, all the hockey work. I did sidebars on the Bullets and all sorts of things through all of it. And, what I kept and what I sort of archived and kept all these years later and stuff like that, it'll just never be done again. But when I was 17, the guys on the desk, Mike Marlowe and those guys are like, and they were trying to pad my ego up. They're like, you got to have your name on the scoreboard page. So they took they took the top scoreboard of the agate, all the
Hmm.
box scores, which was my job. That's what I put together every night, that was my primary job, was
It,
putting
it's
together that.
it's crazy to think how much when we all think back to that era with the agate and the box scores, seeing the league leaders, all that stuff,
The loop
how
leaders, loop
it's
leaders.
wild to think how big that was in my life at one point in time. And yet the last time that I opened a sports page to the standings and statistics, I don't even know if that's even printed in what passes as a newspaper today. It's just funny just to hear you say that. Go
So
ahead.
I
Like it
put it
just,
together. It was
yeah,
just scoreboard, and they put my name, compiled by Nestor
there you go.
Aparicio. So within a week or two of working there, this was Jack's kiss to me. Is like, hey, you're important. Your name's going to be in the paper every day. And then he would say, don't F up the lottery.
That's funny.
Speaking of the lottery, I have Back to the Future scratch offs. I cannot screw these up. And if I could, I would. I swear I would. Because I was infamous for. So, where the radio station's located is around the corner from where our publisher was. And our publisher's name, he's deceased now, his name was Jack Lemmon. Lemmon, like the actor. And he looked like Lou Grant. He looked like Ed Asner. He
Hmm.
absolutely like channeled him. So if you picture what Ed Asner looked like, that's what Jack Lemmon looked like. And Jack was the big, big boss. Corner office, publisher. He was the boss of the Evening Sun. And I was in charge of getting the lottery number. This is when Lotto just kind of came on and six digits, $1 million, the whole deal. I told John Martin, I screwed the numbers up a couple times. I almost got fired. I almost lost my whole career because I screwed up the lottery numbers. And Jack would say, it's got your name at the top. Compiled by. I thought it was a blessing. It was a curse. We're going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour next week. For everyone gathering and love Jim Henneman, my thoughts to you and strength to everyone in the baseball world, everyone in the Oriole world, press box, and beyond who love Jimmy. Henny, as we all called him back in the day. I haven't seen Jim in a long, long time. My heart to everyone out there. We're going to be doing the Crab Cake Tour up at Greenmount Station in Hampstead next week on the 5th of June. Then on the 13th, we're going to be at Fadley's down at Lexington Market. And apparently Luke might be available that day. The Angels are in town. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore history because we can do it better than anybody because we're Baltimore positive. Stay with us.